Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Very nice to see you all here today. Ladies and gentlemen, dear ACT-SAF partners, thank you very much for joining us. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this 7th session. Yeah, we've actually done 7 of these sessions now. I hope you've enjoyed them so far. But the 7th session of the ICAO ACT-SAF series. And this one is on SAF logistics. Once again, I'm very pleased to see many of you here today. My name is Neil Dixon, and I'm Chief Environmental Standards at ICAO. And I'm here with all the ICAO officers working on fuels and ACT-SAF, as well as the focal points of environment from the ICAO regional offices. They'll be supporting tirelessly this event today. Now, today's training is a special one, as it takes place only a few days following the 3rd ICAO Conference on Aviation Alternative Fuels, or CAF3, which was held in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates from 20 to 24th November. Now, I'm pleased to say that CAF3 was a huge success. Many of you were indeed there, delivering on a strong global framework to implement a clean energy transition for international aviation. Now, in this session, we'll hear a little bit more when Dr. Bruno Silva, our ICAO Fuels Officer, takes the floor and takes you through the entire session, but I'll highlight a few crucial points for you here now. Now, with the adoption of a new ICAO global framework for sustainable aviation fuels, low carbon fuels, and aviation cleaner energies, ICAO and its member states will strive to achieve a collective global aspirational vision to reduce CO2 emissions in international aviation by 5% by 2030 compared to zero cleaner energy use. In addition to this collective vision for the cleaner energy transition, the framework will also include harmonized regulatory foundations, supporting implementation initiatives, and improved access to financing for related initiatives so that no country is left behind. Now, in pursuing this vision, each state's special circumstances and respective capabilities will inform their ability to contribute to the vision within their own national timeframes without attributing specific obligations or commitments in the form of emissions reductions goals. CAF3's outcomes will boost investor confidence to scale up the global SAF production. Now, the outcome of CAF3 is indeed a huge achievement, one which I'm sure was reached thanks to the tremendous efforts deployed by many of you in the audience today. Thanks to your contribution to ICAO work on fuels and for promoting the energy transition for aviation within your own national or regulatory jurisdictions. In fact, the ACT-SAF program is a core element of the implementation support pillar of the global framework and has contributed to making CAF3 a success. Arguably, the journey towards cleaner aviation fuels is only the beginning, and ACT-SAF will be more important than ever now to empower states and industry to boost the uptake of SAF in line with ICAO's tremendous newly adopted objective. Now, hence, on a monthly basis, ICAO will continue to offer ACT-SAF trainings on key technical aspects related to SAF, LCAF, and cleaner energy. These trainings are developed and coordinated by ICAO thanks to the strong engagement and commitment of states and our ACT-SAF partners and the aviation and SAF sectors. Today's training follows 6 previous ACT-SAF trainings on an introduction to SAF, SAF sustainability and reporting under CORSIA, the SAF production technology and certification, SAF policies, SAF conversion processes, and SAF accounting book and claim systems, which was our 6th one. For those of you who have missed the previous trainings, well, actually they're all available online, and we encourage you to consult the ICAO's ACT-SAF webpage, which is really growing quite fast. There's a lot of material available there. So you can access all these training videos and presentation materials. Now, a little bit more on today's session. The objective of today's session is to provide participants with the knowledge on SAF logistics and how all parts of the SAF supply chain will work together. And we have some experts available for you today that will give presentations in this regard. Now, more flying with SAF is becoming a reality. We can see that. While most of you are now familiar with photos of biofuel trucks fueling aircraft wings, what we don't always see is the complex SAF supply chain taking place behind the scenes. For this training, we have decided to invite special guests who will tell you the story of the SAF logistical journey. from the collection of the feedstock to the SAF production, blending with conventional fuel, transport by pipeline or truck, distribution to the airport, and of course the use by airline. The SAF supply chain involves many steps and actors. Now, to deliver this training to you, we're very honoured and grateful to count on the technical expertise of 4 key players in the aviation SAF sector. They have all very kindly accepted to share their knowledge and technical know-how to present their experience and contribution to the SAF supply chain. So with us today, we have Andrea Moyes, Global Aviation Global Sustainability Director at BP, Hakan Sakan Fidan, Business Development and Supply Planning Specialist at Turkish Fuel Services, Erin Cook, Sustainability and Environmental Policy Director at San Francisco International Airport, and Grace Vehenda, Senior Manager, Innovation and Sustainability at Kenya Airways. So a big thank you to all 4 of you for being with us today. Now let's take a look at the agenda for this training. And now before leaving the floor to our speakers, I'll pass to Dr. Bruno Silva, our Fuels Officer, who will give you an update on the ICAO ACT-SAF activities and provide more information on the outcomes of CAF3. Then we will move to the 4 presentations, which we'll have in sequence. After the final presentation, we'll save some time, hopefully around 20 to 30 minutes for a session of question and answers, and this will also be moderated by Bruno. Now, a little bit, as I hand over to Bruno, a little bit on housekeeping. As always, I hope you make full use of this session to ask questions. Please raise your hand or post your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to address it during the Q&A. Your questions may also be targeted directly to one of our speakers today, and we encourage every participant to make today's training as interactive and collaborative as possible. Now, let me pass the floor to Bruno. I wish you all a very pleasant ACT-SAF training.
Thank you very much, Neil. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So as we have been doing, I'll give some short updates on where we stand on the ACT-SAF program and also on CAF3 this time. So next slide, can you show next slide, please? So as a reminder again, we can find all the information on the ACT-SAF website. So here are the current numbers that we have there. We have 89 states and 51 organizations. And the ACT-SAF series material is being made available online, and this will be the case for this presentation as well. So we'll be uploading the presentation very soon after the event. Next slide, please. And so here's the list of the events that we had so far. As Neil just mentioned, today we're going to talk about SAF logistics. And here are the next one that we're planning for as of today. We're planning a next event on hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very important component in the SAF production, as we could see from the previous presentations. So we intend to have a dedicated session on that, and also a session on SAF feasibility assessment. And as we have been saying all the time, the future sessions are subject to review. So any feedback on these is very welcome. If you feel that any topic should be considered, with a specific training, please let us know, and we will consider that. And since this is the last event of the year, I would like to inform that we'll also be sending a survey to all the ACT-SAF partners, so to receive your feedback on the ACT-SAF program, so that we can plan ahead for the upcoming year. That's going to be very busy, as you'll be seeing on our next slides here. So we want to be ready to be able to support the program to the best extent possible, so that we have very good outcomes in 2024. So the next slide, please. So again, just giving more details on the outcomes of CAF3. So the big outcome was really the adoption of the new ICAO global framework for sustainable aviation fuels, lower carbon aviation fuels, and other aviation cleaner energies. And the main vision agreed with as part of this global framework is a global aspirational vision to reduce CO2 emissions in international aviation by 5% by 2030, compared to zero cleaner energy use. So this will support the clean energy transition of aviation net zero sector needed to achieve the current goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And the framework is structured into four building blocks. So first one, policy and planning. Second, regulatory framework. Third, implementation support, which is much related to ACT-SAF. And the fourth one, financing of cleaner energy. So I invite you to take a look at the framework. Like there's a lot of good information there, and it will really set the scene for ICAO action on environmental matters for the years to come. So next slide. And together with CAF3, we were hosting like a series of announcements on the breaks on the sides of the meeting. So first of all, like a series of projects are coming to fruition thanks to the voluntary contributions that we are receiving from our key member states and organizations. So from the EU, we'll be having a new project that will fund feasibility studies in 10 African states. France also provided funding that will support the development of business implementation reports in Ethiopia and in one additional state that's still to be confirmed. Netherlands also provided funding that will fund the feasibility studies in 3 states, and we have announced Jordan and Chile during CAF3, and there is one more that will be confirmed. Airbus also announced their support to the development of 3 feasibility studies in South America. And we also received funding from the UK and from Cote d'Ivoire, and we're working to define like the projects that will be executed with this funding. So here are the photos like of our Secretary General with our partners like on these announcements that were held on CAF3. And next slide, one more important, on the next slide, we'll have one more exciting announcement. So it's not only about future projects that we announced in CAF3, but we also announced like the conclusion of the three first feasibility studies that were developed under the ACT-SAF program for Cote d'Ivoire, Rwanda, and Zimbabwe. And these were the first feasibility studies that were developed with the use of the template for feasibility studies that we developed under the program as well, with the contribution from all the ACT-SAF partners. So we also had a ceremony, an announcement ceremony during CAF3. So here's a photo of our Secretary General with the cover of the feasibility studies. And the feasibility studies, like they inform the information of the specific situation of each state. They identify priority pathways for SAF production. They provide information on implementation support and financing needs for the implementation of the priority pathways identified, and also a recommendation on the action plan aligned with the state's governmental policies. So this follows the template that we developed like on this year. So and now these feasibility studies are available for consultation and for downloading freely on the ACT-SAF website as well. So with that, we can go to the next slide. And so with that, I would like to hand over to our first speaker, Mary Steers from RBP, Sustainability Strategic Business Development Manager. So as Neil mentioned, like we have been receiving a lot of questions related to logistics in the other 6 events. So we hope that these presentations will be useful for all of you. And please, again, feel free to ask any questions that take advantage of our experts that will be presenting the speakers here, their experiences here. So thank you very much. So Mary, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Hopefully you guys can all hear me okay. Again, my name is Mary Steers. Great, you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so as we work our way and talk about logistics today, I'm going to talk about SAF as a drop-in fuel and work my way backwards in the supply chain to then discuss feedstock. So we're going to go from one end to the other in the supply chain. But to start off, I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing as BP. And today we can leverage our existing value chain to move feedstocks, to access global production, utilize logistics and airport infrastructure. So these are things we do today. We are one of the leading marketers of SAF, and to date, we've supplied over 40 locations. We supply SAF from 2 BP refineries. We are in strategic partnerships with others to scale demand, and our global capability in trading and shipping does give us the ability to move feedstocks and finished products effectively. Again, we're utilizing existing infrastructure and business that we do today. In the future, we're in strategic partnerships to increase feedstock availability, and we develop and co-own technology for SAF development. We play a role in securing approvals for SAF pathways, and we plan to do more to develop to meet BP's aims to produce around 100,000 barrels of biofuels per day, supported by planned investments in several new projects. You can go to the next slide, please. All right, so SAF as a drop-in fuel. So it's important that we've gotten to this place that SAF is considered a drop-in fuel. It's fuel made from 100% renewable feedstocks. It can be blended with conventional fossil jet. It's the 50-50 balance that we can talk about. You can blend up to 50% of that renewable feedstock into a conventional jet fuel. And that blend is considered a drop-in fuel. You'll notice that at times people use the term SAF to either mean the fuel derived from the 100% renewable feedstock or the blend of the 50-50. So just keep that in mind. So while today that 50-50 threshold exists, the industry is working on testing and approvals for SAF to be utilized at 100% without blending with the conventional jet. But until then, it is really important to ensure that any existing infrastructure, whether it's pipelines, terminals, airports, can be used with a certified fuel blend. So no matter what you are moving that product through, you want to make sure that it is certified to move the blend. One of the ways that we are moving forward in trying to test and seek approvals for the 100% level is the very historic flight that took place this week, Flight 100. Air BP was one of the fuel suppliers to a consortium of aviation experts that was led by Virgin Atlantic on the first ever 100% sustainable aviation fuel, or SAF fueled, transatlantic flight by a commercial airline. We're very excited about this week. Air BP was selected as one of the consortium's preferred SAF suppliers, and our specialist teams worked tirelessly across the last year to prepare for this moment, blending and handling the product, planning the logistics to make this flight a reality. We've collaborated with Virgin Atlantic as well as Rolls-Royce and Boeing to meet their specific requirements. The pioneering flight aims to demonstrate the skills and ability of the UK and the global aviation industry to meet the industry's ambitions and specifically help the research, certification, and technology developments required to safely push for an increase in SAF production and regulatory approvals. You can go ahead to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit more around examples of supply chain custody. As we discussed, if SAF is considered the drop-in fuel, from a logistics perspective, there are advantages to utilizing mass balance and book and claim. And I know you had a session on this previously as it was on the chart. One of the advantages is to think about, a good example is to explain it, is around 50% of the fuel demand in Europe comes from 10 airports. Therefore, supplying SAF to a small number of large airports is logistically preferred versus supplying SAF. And sorry, I have a light behind me. We'll see if it turns on. Versus supplying small quantities of SAF to all airports all around, right? So if you just kind of think about scale, that concept makes sense. Also want to be clear that book and claim is a system where the SAF physical product and its environmental attributes are decoupled. So again, if you're thinking about what system works for where you are, make sure that you're clear on what those differences are. While we're working to grow SAF availability and distribution to as many airports as possible, it's important, again, to be able to deliver SAF through the efficient and low-cost logistics that we have today, and utilizing these methods help enable that. The EU has recognized this need and will allow for mass balancing in Europe's largest airports for the first few years of the SAF mandate that they've approved this year. One other challenge that fuel suppliers face to think about this stage of the supply chain process is that in order to qualify for tax credits and other financial incentives, some jurisdictions require measurement of the renewable content in aviation fuel using third-party verification through C14 testing. So this would happen at this stage in the supply chain. But with a range of renewable feedstocks continually evolving, C14 may not always be an effective test method for all possible feedstocks. We believe feedstock traceability and life cycle carbon emission saving measures are a more efficient and cost-effective way of measuring and accounting for the carbon footprint of SAF. Next slide, please. Okay, logistics considerations for SAF. So we've talked about SAF as a drop-in fuel, how you utilize existing logistics in terms of getting to an airport, and different ways you can do that logistically as well as through mass balance and book and claim. But how you produce the SAF also impacts your logistics and what is needed. There's two main ways to make SAF: standalone units or through co-processing. Standalone units use sustainable feedstocks to produce the synthetic kerosene that is then blended up to 50% with conventional fuel to produce SAF. Again, this would be the drop-in fuel we discussed. This creates the need for a blending facility either at the refinery or at the terminal. So wherever you produce the synthetic kerosene, you produce the conventional jet, you need to be able to blend them together. When producing SAF through co-processing, sustainable feedstocks, currently up to 5%, are being processed alongside the fossil feedstocks through the hydroprocessing in the refinery. SAF, therefore, comes directly out of the refinery into the same tanks that exist today. BP is leading an ASTM task force to increase that limit of 5% up to 30%, which will allow refineries to make even more SAF via this method than they do today. BP makes co-processing as mentioned, makes SAF via co-processing as mentioned earlier at our refineries in Lingen in Germany, as well as Castelló in Spain. And we use waste and residue feedstocks. Refineries do have a natural limit to how much of these feedstocks that can be used because waste oils are actually quite corrosive, and existing refineries are not built to handle unlimited amounts of waste oils. This is where standalone units can be designed to more purposefully to meet the feedstocks that might be expected in a process or within a region. Both standalone units and co-processing will be required to meet the increasing SAF demand. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we've worked our way down to the feedstock point of the conversation. And what we want to highlight is that most of the SAF supplied today is derived using the hydrotreated esters and fatty acids, the HEFA pathway. The primary feedstocks for this conversion pathway include waste fats, oils, and greases. When it comes to transporting these feedstocks to refineries, this is typically done through our existing logistics, rail, truck, barge. So there's the advantage that the existing logistics and the movement of that is already in process for the supply chain. One interesting caveat is some of the oils to be used in HEFA facilities will be supplied from sustainable crops, such as cover crops. BP has an agreement with a company named New Seed that grows a plant called Carinata. And this plant produces oils with good energy density without causing land use change or an impact to the food supply. The seed is actually collected and processed in a seed crushing facility, after which the oil is moved to a facility that can convert it to SAF, either in a co-processing facility or a standalone HEFA plant. So what's interesting about this is you can actually access a global movement. So you don't have to have your refineries and your processes right near where your feedstock is located. As we expand as an industry to using more of the alternative feedstocks, different considerations come into play. For example, different SK sources cannot be mixed together. So you can't mix a HEFA and an alcohol to jet in the same location. In terms of sugarcane, these feedstocks grow very easily and they transport by train. However, sugarcane must be processed into ethanol within 48 hours of being cut. To achieve low logistical costs, reduce carbon emissions from transport, and make better use of infrastructure, ethanol plants benefit from being placed close to feedstock production as well as near refineries. Second generation biomass, such as agricultural and forestry residue, is in vast supplies of feedstock, but once aggregated, it must be transported by rail or road. It can't be moved by pipeline, given it's a solid. Ultimately, this means that there will need to be small production plants near where forestry residues are processed. Similarly, for municipal solid waste, it must be processed near the municipality that provides the waste. Once the feedstock is processed via Fischer-Tropsch gasification, which is a technology that BP co-owns, the production facility can yield FT paraffinic wax, which can be further processed on site to make SAF, or it can be moved to another facility where it can be converted to SAF via co-processing. There are some challenges with moving FT wax, as this feedstock must be transported and discharged in heated pipes and tanks. Otherwise, it will become a solid. Regarding e-fuels, as the final example here, the challenge is to have green hydrogen and sources of qualified carbon close together. And this is not always possible. Usually we have one or the other. The industry is looking for potential ways to bring the two feedstocks together that can make the SAF, as well as choosing the right energy vector that can make the feedstock movable and SAF production possible. Some countries are getting ready for the need to have CO2 moved around to reach the facilities. And while CO2 pipelines do exist today, a much larger network will be needed to meet the ambitions. And on to the next slide, which I think is a video for us to share with you around our UK blending terminal. So hopefully this works. I'll let you guys hit play.
We're loading 20 of these 100,000 litre tankers with sustainable aviation fuel known as SAF to give customers access to SAF in the UK. This terminal stores aviation fuel and supplies its customers by pipeline, by road and by rail. We import SAF by ship. SAF was developed to help decarbonise the aviation industry. Every customer has slightly different needs. A different blend of conventional jet fuel and SAF. My name is Ian Blacker and I'm an operations leader for BP. The SAF that we primarily use here is made from used cooking oils that would have otherwise been disposed of. We blend it here, retest it and then send it to airports around the UK. We're really excited about SAF because it has the potential to reduce CO2 emissions on a life cycle basis by up to 80% when compared to the conventional jet fuel that it replaces. We used to blend only jet fuel until recently, but now around 20% of what we hold on site is SAF. The industry is growing really fast. SAF demand is expected to grow exponentially over the coming years. Air BP has repurposed its existing infrastructure by investing around £1 million to transform the facility into one of the leading sustainable aviation fuel terminals in the UK. It gives me a lot of pride to say that I'm playing my part in decarbonisation initiatives like this.
Great, so thank you. And in summary, we want to highlight that SAF being considered a drop-in fuel is really important to simplifying the logistics. Co-processing gives the opportunity to simplify those logistics further. You don't need the separate access for blending. Mandates should consider mass balancing centers rather than having SAF at every single airport. And a booking claim system can also help broaden SAF's reach. And finally, it's important to remember that feedstock types impact the logistics and plant locations for processing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mary. Like, very exciting to see like all the movement, and congratulations for the 100% flight. Like, that was really exciting to see, and we can see like a lot of good feedback on that initiative as well.
Yeah, it was quite exciting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, please hold for the questions and answers. Like, I'm sure we'll have some good this discussion in the end. So with that, like, I'd like to move to our next speaker. So Hakan Serkan Fidan from Turkish Fuel Services is the business project and business development and supply planning specialist. So Hakan, the floor is yours. Then we look forward to hearing your experiences on SAF.
Thank you, Bruno. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Perfect. Hello to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Hakan Serkan Fidan, and I'm working as a project business development and supply planning specialist at Turkish Fuel Services. First of all, I'm very pleased to meet you, and I would also like to thank the ICAO team for giving me the opportunity to make a presentation. So let me start with the brief information about my company. Next slide, please. Thank you. As Turkish Fuel Services, we are the leading jet fuel company with over 50% of market share in Turkey, and we expect to supply and sell approximately 3.5 million tons of jet fuel by the end of this year. And according to our estimates, this capacity will increase to 4 million tons in next year. We are located at the Istanbul airport and the official jet fuel provider of Istanbul airport as well. We are also the main supplier of Turkish Airlines. TFS has a port on the Black Sea coast of Istanbul only for its own operations. You may see at the right corner of the slide. This port provides an opportunity to ship supply up to 125,000 tons. When the discharging starts, the fuel is delivered to our 300,000 cubic meter capacity fuel farm through 12-kilometer underground hydrant pipes, which is the largest jet fuel storage facility of Turkey. And after resting and quality control process, in accordance, of course, with aviation fuel standards, the fuel is pumped to pit points via 80-kilometer hydrant lines to be supplied to aircraft. The dispensers, which are connected the wing to the aircraft from the pit point, refueling the fuel, carrying any load on them. Next slide, please. Besides all this, we are closely following developments on the decarbonization of aviation. As you know very well, aviation accounts for around 2-3% of global carbon emissions. You can see some information about SAF usage targets, future forecasts, and the facts for now in the slide. And aviation authorities forecast that SAF will play the key role in carbon reduction, and electrification not a solution in the midterm, and SAF will not compensated by the carbon credits, which is important. And with the mandates going forth in the EU and the US and some countries, and such as the CORSIA program under ICAO, promoting the use of SAF for decarbonization targets, the SAF production, offtake agreements, supply chain is growing day by day. Next slide, please. Actually, after briefly talking about the situation in Turkey and some of the work we have done as TFS, I would like to move on the main subject, SAF logistics and the after supply process. So SAF will be mandatory with the legislation that we are expecting from our Civil Aviation Authority to publish in the near future. And in this direction, some potential investors have started to work with SAF production facility. As I mentioned earlier, the demand of SAF by airlines is increasing day by day, and leading airports such as IGA want to offer SAF to their customers. As for TFS, we have conducted a pre-feasibility study to build establishment of a SAF production facility in Turkey, and this study we have been in discussions with the proven technology providers, some of the feedstock suppliers, and also negotiation with the government agencies on the regulatory structure that needs to be established. And we are trying to follow developing SAF market in the world. In the meantime, we made a real the first refueling of sustainable aviation fuel in Turkey, and we are continuing to do so. I will talk about this part in detail in a while. We are also trying to closely follow new technologies and the regulations related to SAF production. So next slide, please. The start of our SAF journey dates back to February 2 in 2022. Prior to this date, one of our goals while conducting of work on SAF was to realize the first refueling in Turkey. So Turkish Airlines has also wanted to use SAF on flights. And for this reason, we started our negotiations on this issue. Subsequently, we contacted fuel producers that we could supply SAF. And after one of the suppliers informed us that they could deliver the fuel at the time and in the quantity we requested, we start the contract and logistics process. And after a period, approximately 1 month, we received the fuel at our facility and physically, and we made our planning as IGA, TFS, and Turkish Airlines for the flight that we planned on February 2. And the flight was to take place from Istanbul to Charles de Gaulle, Paris. We added a certain amount of SAF containing jet fuel to the conventional jet fuel to the required volume, and performed a final quality control process before supplying aircraft. With the difference of our refueling operation, we start refueling with tankers, and I can say that we took our place in one of the historic days of Turkish aviation. So next slide, please. Yeah, the main subject for today. I wanna try to tell you about it in details. This part. First, the process starts with receiving the SAF usage request from airlines. But airlines can submit their requests directly from the supplier or through airport operators. And after collecting the request, we contact fuel producers for the supply of sustainable aviation fuel according to the volume that we need or that we reach. We ask to supplier whether it is possible to supply SAF, of course, in that volume, and the needs SAF ratio in the fuel, because the blending rate requested by airline companies and the blending rate in the fuel that the fuel supplier can provide could be different. What I mean is that while airline wants to use, let's say, 2% of sustainable aviation fuel on the flight, but the blending ratio in the fuel we have purchased from the producers, it can be around 30, 35, 40% containing of sustainable aviation fuel. Then when the supplier gives us a loading date, this may change, but it's usually happens approximately 1 month after the date we started the negotiations. At the same time, the NDA and the contract process begins. This includes understanding by the parties of information such as the transportation of fuel, payment methods for this transportation, and confidentiality rules to be followed. After the NDA was signed, we negotiate with carrier companies for the container and transportation operations of the cargo coming from the port to our country. This part also may vary depending on your agreement method, because the fuel producer can bring the fuel to your facility, or you can buy it from the facility where they produce it, and it's entirely your financial decision and operational flexibility of companies. So when the loading day comes, the transporter and we have agreed upon brings the container from producer's facility to the port in that region, then loads it onto the cargo ship that will bring it to our country. And we are monitoring the process, get in touch with the carrier and supplier. The necessary documents are shared among supply chain stakeholders, which are aviation fuel quality release certificate, certificate of load, certificate of analysis, composite sample, and of course running sample after loading, batch calculations, and ISO container or tanking loading report by third-party auditor company, and export guidance report, as I remember, and biofuel sustainability statement. These documents provide us this information: the bioquantity in the batch, the biofuel feedstock category, origin of feedstock, greenhouse gases saving in details such as transport, processing, and distribution, and loading location information, batch numbers. The required specifications are met, which are ASTM 7566 and DEF standard 91091, and so on. The fuel must be brought to a port and specialist custom office in Turkey, and where nationalization can be made, because you cannot carry out road transportation without nationalizing the transit fuel. And the carrier companies shows the document and creating an interim bill of lading belonging to the shipping company, from the main one. And this document given to customs at the port. After the approval of customs, our carrier forwards the approved interim bill of lading to us, and we prepare an import declaration by taking the cargo invoice, the bill of lading, and some documents that I mentioned, and submits it to customs upon registration. Then after the registration, and custom takes a sample of the fuel and takes it to its laboratory to have it analyzed. If the HS code, which is the identification of the good, here is the sustainable aviation fuel and jet fuel, and if in the analysis result is the same with the HS code and as in the declaration is closing. Finally, taxes are paid and the fuel is bring to our facility. Next slide, please. At this SAF refueling process, and airlines updated SAF usage flight plans are inquired by us and checked again. The depending on aircraft type and the number of passengers and distance traveled, there is the amount of fuel determined by the airline that you need to refuel the aircraft as usual. On the other hand, there is the desired SAF usage rate for this flight. So according to this, mixture calculations are made to provide the desired SAF ratio in each flight. Then the amount calculated from the container, tank or ISO container, whichever you are keeping the SAF containing jet fuel, is taken to the tanker to be refueled. And enough jet fuel is added to complete the volume from the tank where the jet fuel is loaded. And the steps after this point are the same as jet refueling. The fuel mixtures ready for refueling is left to rest for half an hour. And a sample is taken from bottom point and quality control is performed. And after exceeding 1,000 liters during the supply to the aircraft, we take another sample and quality control is performed again. And when finished, after the supply is completed, a final sample is taken and observed. So next slide, please. Before completing my presentation, I would like to give some information about our electric fleet, and we have maybe it can be interesting for you. We have been using these vehicles since 2018, the opening date of Istanbul Airport, and 1909 of our refueling operations with electrical dispensers. This is a transformation project. When we started this project, there was no electric supply vehicle at the airport in this size. That's why we bought a normal vehicle without an engine and transformed it. And we worked with a local manufacturer. Since this is a busy airport, these vehicles have delivered approximately 700,000 refueled to aircraft until today. I mean, it's as proven itself. We have 50 dispensers and 20 charging stations on the apron to charge them. And since these are DC charging, we can charge vehicles in 1 hour, where we can use fully charged vehicles in operation approximately 1-2 days. It does not have a high range. But if we accept that this is a closed area, I mean, apron site, we do not cover much ground. And we designed the vehicles as a low profile so that it can go under every aircraft and the operator does not have to carry the fuel house. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hakan, for that experience. And this is exactly what we were looking for this session, the practical experiences, and it's nice to see how it complemented the RBP's presentation, because they have the blending facility away from the airport, and you're doing the blending right under the aircraft wing, the different ways of doing it. So this is all very interesting. So we can discuss further on the Q&A session. Thank you very much for that. So again, so we started with the fuel producer, now the fuel distributor, and now we're going to go for the next step on the chain, so which is the airport. So I'd like now to invite Erin Cook from the San Francisco International Airport. She's the Sustainability and Environmental Policy Director, and she will give us like the perspectives from the airport with regards to SAF logistics. So Erin, thank you very much for your time. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join. And we always really appreciate the chance for airports to share our voice in sustainable aviation fuel, whether it's incentives policy or infrastructure. So thank you to ICAO for the invitation and to this community for listening. We want to offer ourselves as a resource. So please do reach out, ask questions, or happy to connect separately. Great. So today, I will be covering a bit about San Francisco International Airport. So just to give you some context as to how we've received the fuel and how we're using and distributing it today. I also wanted to share a resource that we've recently put together for North American airports out of the American Airport Executives Association, AAAE, that we are leveraging as a tool. It gives a great overview of how airports can consider infrastructure and just more of the upstream supply in order to enable considerations about our infrastructure. Then I'll talk a little bit about SFO's application in doing a a feasibility study on SAF, supply chain logistics, and financing. We won't cover financing today, but certainly the logistics and the infrastructure. And then talk about how we're using SAF today as compared to our feasibility study, just with some key insights or considerations for airports or honestly subnational governments that are considering feasibility studies using ideally that ICAO framework that was referenced in the beginning with Neil's comments. So that's what we're going to cover today. But starting with SFO, so our airport, if we go to the next slide. Just to give you, again, kind of set the stage and give some context, our airport is a large hub. We are the 6th largest market in North America, and we pre-COVID served about 58 million passengers, had about 48 airlines that were operating, and are a pretty large facility, so about 21,000 square feet. We have about 3.5 miles or 5,200 acres of land that we do occupy. However, we like to keep in mind that about 50% of that land mass is actually already considered underwater and is heavily impacted today by climate change. Those really put our business activity and business continuity at risk, which is our #1 obligation to our region, is to be able to provide the level of employment, 46,000 jobs. We are the largest employer in our county, and we want to be able to sustain that. And the way that we are able to do that is really by meeting our climate obligations and our mitigation. So next slide. So just to give you a sense of what those climate obligations are and what our impacts are as an organization, SFO has adopted a quad, actually zero goal now as part of our new strategic plan. We are focusing on achieving net zero carbon, energy, water, and waste by 2030. And our pathway to do it is represented here on the left side of my slide. We already are about at a 41% emission reductions through implementing scope 2 adjustments to have a net zero carbon energy source from a hydropower facility that's located and owned by our city and county of San Francisco, which our airport is owned and operated by. In addition, certainly mitigations in our building sector and our on-ground transportation sector. The fund balance for that is going to be activating an electric central plant. However, when we look at our sphere of influence and our scope of emissions, SFO's total emissions are really less than 1% of those total emissions that arise from the operations of our airport. So as an organization that is wholly invested in climate impacts, our airport's mission was recently updated to be an airport delivering an experience where people and planet come first. We recognize that just focusing on scope 1 and 2 emissions was not sufficient. And so when we look at those total emissions, about 96% come from our aircraft activity. And that is something that we as an organization very quickly look to pivot and address as early as the 2010s. And so that's really going to be the focus, obviously, on what we cover and talk about today, is how SFO is working to drive and focus on our contribution, our brokering, and our enablement of our airlines in receiving fuel, sustainable aviation fuel in particular, as well as more broad decarbonization methods that certainly align with ICAO and the CORSIA goals and values that were articulated earlier this morning. So next slide. The things that we'll cover today and where we feel like airports have the ability to provide input is is basically, a 4-sphere of influence for us. So we have the opportunity to engage and consider the feedstocks, the production, transportation and logistics, and infrastructure. And there are lots of questions that we'll be considering. I've articulated those here. There are probably dozens more, but my goal is today just to kind of cover how we're considering this at the airport or how we are considering this as an organization to really broaden our reach and share our experience at SFO. Very few other airports within North America, but those that have come to the table, we've reached consensus around what the opportunities are in logistics and infrastructure. And so again, I'll kind of play those out as part of a resource that we've recently put together. So I'll start broadly with that resource and then ratchet it down to what we're covering within California at SFO. So our next slide just is meant to quickly snapshot what that resource is. Again, through this organization, I can actually put this link in the chat. It is linked in my presentation, which will be shared after. But we've looked at the supply chain, which I think is maybe a good example of how subnational organizations can come together and provide resources that can provide insight and intelligence to organizations as they're considering big, broad questions like SAF infrastructure and supply chain. So here's what we found as we went through that study. Next slide. So I will say my slides were narrowed a little bit, but I want to just maybe talk even more upstream than what this slide articulates. We do feel as an industry, as airports, that it is incredibly helpful to understand and to partner as early as possible with both producers or our airlines as they're considering offtake agreements or have executed on offtake agreements, to understand really where that upstream production exists. So where is the SAF made? What are the feedstocks that are being leveraged? And what is the transportation nexus or node that we need to be aware of in order to receive the fuel, or even gap analyze where there are deficits in that transportation node in order to see if the airport can accommodate that. And I say that because airports themselves are really trusted partners and voices as it relates, and I would say maybe this is North Americally exclusive, but because we're government agencies, we tend to be an important voice in the room when we are talking to legislators and regulators at the state level and the federal level to emphasize and articulate where we have infrastructure needs that can be usually met with grant rebates or government rebates or government grants. Those are often only made available to government agencies. And so where airports, again, concede and recognize that there are transportation infrastructure barriers to receiving decarbonization solutions for our campus, it is just incredibly important that we be aware of that. So when we look upstream and understand, again, where SAF is made, where the adjacencies exist to the feedstock, what is the production cycle and the lifeline of that, we really quickly want to figure out how we can enable pipeline access. So many of the producers that we've had conversations with are particularly compelled, as we actually saw with the Turkish presentation previously, Air BP, is to figure out where we have the opportunity to connect into existing pipelines. So understanding and exploring that for your airport, or again, even as a subnational government where those exist, it is highly likely that that will be part of your transportation infrastructure for sustainable aviation fuel, just as it is for conventional SAF or fossil jet A today. So this is a resource, again, that we mapped out to understand that realistically, the fuel that we expect coming to North America will likely be served via these pipelines. Our 10 largest airports in North America are already served by the pipelines that are represented. And so this is an important component, or again, node in that transportation infrastructure. Next slide. And in addition to that, where we are underserved by direct pipeline access, we are also needing to and have the opportunity to connect with other transportation logistics systems, such as rail and ground transportation. These are important to note because some of our medium-sized and smaller size airports are going to need to be able to gain access to these fuels via non-conventional systems. So rail and ground transport are obviously easier to amend, augment, and supplement, and are likely going to be the focus of probably state grant opportunities and or the logistics companies that are working to serve the SAF production facilities to enable the uplift of the fuels from airports that our airlines have dedicated the fuel be delivered to. So again, as a subnational government or as an airport, understanding what your other logistics alternatives are if if pipeline is not an option is really important. So let's move to the next slide. One way we have the opportunity to really keep track of that is that there are, I want to just flag before we move to this, a lot of really great resources that are out there that can help organizations such as airports, subnational governments, really gain access to where SAF is being supplied and where that intelligence exists. There are many dashboards that are out there. I know ICAO has a tool that is tracking that. We also have some that Boeing and Bloomberg have put together that we're really leveraging in North America. But I want to make the audience aware that those are also really great tools to leverage to understand what SAF is being claimed, what is committed, and what ultimately may be coming to that transportation and logistics network that I showed on the prior slides. So now, knowing that the fuel is going to be coming to you, we, as an airport organization, like to really understand what is best and what is the best practice for on airport and off airport. I will start by saying that on airport is very much dependent upon whether your facility or campus has the space available to be able to accommodate additional transportation infrastructure and or fuel infrastructure. So at SFO, we are, as I mentioned earlier, already incredibly land constrained and have tremendously high real estate values that we want to maximize the development of in order to provide our business purpose, business continuity, and economic development benefits to our region. So for that reason, we are not dedicating on-site infrastructure development for SAF. In the optimal scenario, most of that, as Air BP mentioned, will occur off airport. So everything from the feedstock harvesting to the production and commercialization of the facility, to the production of neat SAF, to ultimately the blending of the SAF into the 1655 spec. That all will be likely happening off airport, ideally leveraging what are the infrastructure that already is available, either through conventional producers, or through new partnerships and development. I'll share SFO's example in a few slides, but this is really what we're looking at. So all of those things happening off airport, ideally where the opportunity exists. That fuel then can come again either by pipeline as the optimal solution, rail or truck into an airport fuel farm, and then itself can be distributed, as we saw on the Turkish example previously, by the coolest electric trucks I've ever seen, or again, large airports tend to already have hydrant systems. So bringing that fuel into the airport fuel farm, distributed via hydrant system, is also the lowest carbon intensity way to do it. So leveraging that infrastructure, making sure it's pre-blended and tested to meet your airport requirements and the fuel component requirements is really a great step. Next slide. And then just some other considerations that we have around transportation and delivery. So again, recognizing that airports need to be aware that these fuels should be received at your airport right now because of the ASTM standards. That would be our own national requirement. The fuels are only allowed to be blended up to 50%, which makes them essentially undistinguishable from a fossil jet A, except that it has certainly better properties, as we all know in the industry. But those fuels then they don't need to be segregated. They don't need to be stored in a separate blending tank. They don't need to be distributed via a separate fuel system. So that is a huge benefit of sustainable aviation fuel at that current blend rate. I will note that it is certainly of value for an airport in particular, who may have a fuel consortium or a buyers alliance, to get in and have a conversation with that group much earlier than SAF is actually delivered, especially for emerging economies where SAF is new. We found actually for our own airport in 2018, working with our fuel consortium prior to our first delivery, to get all of our airlines in support, and to certainly get our airfield operations team, our fire and life safety teams, just understanding the fuel and really advocates for the fuel before it was delivered was incredibly helpful. So there were no barriers to entry as the fuel was actually received. I realize we are actually now 5 years later, and there seems to be, or there should be, much more sophistication and awareness and support in the industry. However, definitely still recommend it if folks are less aware of SAF in your countries or at your airports. Next slide. And then this is just another slide that can represent a lot of times as airports are just getting started, and or as there are special events, we do find that our airline partners like to sometimes do into-plane services where they're delivering the fuel directly into the wing. I'm sure everyone can recognize that this is not the optimal delivery solution, just because of the challenges in really managing our flight activity on our airfields. However, if this is the case, these fuel trucks can be sufficient to handle the demand and do allow usually higher volumes than what we're receiving at SFO is about a 30% blend. It allows that directly to go into an aircraft and receive that carbon reduction and actually air quality benefit on the airfield directly. So we may start seeing some of these as part of pilots and initiatives popping up at airports around the world. And it's a great way to really visualize, communicate, and get support for SAF on your airfield and across your airport partners. Next slide. So that, again, those are meant to just give you some highlights of how to consider the upstream feedstock development, as well as the production, the transportation, logistics infrastructure in order to achieve the enablement to receive the fuel at the airport, and then some on airport considerations. Now we'll look at how SFO has actually applied that. So next slide, please. Just for background, to give a little bit of a quick snapshot of how SFO has engaged in sustainable aviation fuel, we have been really working on a SAF program since 2017, when we held our first workshop with very intentionally our airport partners, airlines, SAF producers, so alternative fuel suppliers, our conventional suppliers, so both the folks that were already delivering Jet A to SFO, as well as the folks that operated our pipeline, and then actually some NGO partners, to really explore what we needed to do in order to elevate sustainable aviation fuel use at our airport, but also across the state of California. That group actually then really worked to recognize that there were still price supports that were needed, and so lobby the California Air Resources Board to allow for the low carbon fuel standard to include sustainable aviation fuel, which gives it actually about $1.25 incentive over any other state in the nation to date, though many are coming online right now. That actually was a successful initiative, which really pushed California in January 2019. That was actually included, so I got to update my dates here a little bit. Our group then quickly recognized that there were some challenges in receiving the fuel, and so recommended we put together a sustainable aviation fuel logistics, supply chain, and financial feasibility study. So again, with all of those partners, we teamed up to do that. In the interim, we did start receiving sustainable aviation fuel through both an initial initiative through Singapore Airlines. Thank you again to them for their tremendous leadership bringing SAF to SFO in 2018. Then some program with United Airlines as part of a Global Climate Action Summit that we held. And then actually starting in 2020, we started to receive regular supply, both from World Energy, which is located in Paramount, California, and then the most volume out of Neste. The partners that are shown here are all the suppliers that are currently and are still very much pushing supply to SFO. To date, we actually last fiscal year, so 2022, we received 8 million gallons of neat sustainable aviation fuel, and we continue to see those numbers actually about double every year. So we're hoping we will hit that threshold of 10 million with our goal of our sustainable aviation fuel working group being 5% SAF by 2025. So that's actually about 60 million gallons for us. So we have a ways to go in 2 years, but with our partners and with some of the logistics being well answered, we hope we can seed that solution and meet that North Star that we've set. So next slide. So really what we considered within our sustainable aviation fuel feasibility study were all of the things that are represented here. So we wanted to see if there was the potential of, in the feedstock piece, much more of an advocacy perspective of really supporting our state of California and the producers themselves in exploring what could be the lowest carbon intensity feedstock that we could get into our own airport pathway and really develop to really experience the economic development benefits within the state of California. For us, that really led us to working with our Natural Resources Agency to evaluate waste woody biomass and forest residues, which have a huge amount of impact in really being the fuel for the wildfires that are ravaging our state. So being able to harvest those and use those as a feedstock. We also are looking at where are the opportunities where maybe SFO itself could be a supplier of those feedstocks. Things that we're considering are everything from carbon capture to where we have the ability to capture fats, oils, and greases and feed it into that global supply chain. So lots of opportunities for airports to really think about that and to team up with your producers to see how you can be part of that solution. Then in terms of the production, understanding where the fuel is produced again and where there is a node or nexus to your airport is important. So that has to relate also to who's committed to that production. What airline do they operate at your airport? And have they committed that fuel to serving your facility? That's something to keep in mind, particularly as we're starting to see the rise of book and claim. It is important to be aware that that fuel may be committed to your organization, but only through accounting or a balance sheet. So you may not need to consider the transportation logistics if that is the case and is being booked and claimed. Then in terms of transport and logistics, so really looking upstream and understanding like what exists or honestly what maybe previously existed. SFO itself has actually a rail corridor, rail spur that was deactivated, and something that we're considering is the opportunity to reactivate it. Then understanding what the capacity is and if there are constraints. We, for example, have a pipeline that is over constrained, is very difficult to schedule on. So looking for ways around that pipeline or opportunities to supplement it are incredibly important. And then just lastly, the infrastructure. So both on-site and upstream, same thing, what exists, what's the condition of that facility? Does it have capacity constraints? In doing our own study, for example, we recognize that we had insufficient storage at our airport, only about a 2-day surplus of fuel. And so very quickly looked to remedy that and added 2 additional tanks that could accommodate that, whether it's conventional or alternative fuels. And then, just understanding what the value of your organization is and how to really build sustainable aviation fuel as a part of your strategic planning or climate action planning, the benefits there, and why you would consider making an infrastructure investment is because it can provide certainly the greenhouse gas emissions mitigation, also tremendous air quality benefits for the folks that work in your airfield, but does provide fuel redundance and resilience in certainly a global economy where fossil fuels are being increasingly constrained due to geopolitical issues. So all of those things for us were part of our huge consideration. Next slide. And I promise I will wrap up shortly. So just to keep in mind here for SFO, we wanted to really try to match, as any organization, subnational government would, what the demand curves or growth curves for sustainable aviation fuel would look like at our facility. So again, that's really important to understand what those fuel supply forecasts are, who's expected to bring or deliver the fuel for your organization and how you can accommodate that. So what we did was really looked at what the production facilities were, where those airline commitments were, and how that growth curve would potentially impact the airport, both in terms of what the current blend wall is through our certification program, but in the future, and something we're actually revisiting this analysis with, is once that blend wall goes away, what does that mean for us in terms of infrastructure? Very few organizations are considering that 100% SAF, but as we just saw from Air BP, it's something we might need to consider more quickly. So next slide. And so once we understood what that demand was, we really looked to map that across our current fueling infrastructure to understand where the fuel would ultimately be delivered, what the most optimal situation for that would be, and then how ultimately it would come by pipeline to our airport. So we did basically the logistics mapping across 3 different time horizons: short, medium, and long term, where we looked at both the volume predictions, the production source, and then the modes of transportation in order to bring the fuel to the airport. This included, we recognize, kind of a hybrid option that was both by truck, which is how it was delivered initially, then by barge, which is actually how it's being received currently, and then by fuel pipeline. So when I say barge, it's actually coming to the East Bay and then connecting to our current pipeline. But that helped us really both visualize what those transportation infrastructure pieces were going to be, but also then I think did an incredibly great job at making all of our conventional producers and transportation logistics companies aware that this was something that we were considering, that was something important to our airlines, and ultimately helped kind of spear growth and development that I'll share on the next slide, or next two slides. So moving forward one more. So this was basically laid out by location. We worked with a consultant to understand what the short and medium term facility access points would be, and really identify what was most likely to come online based upon a series of different criteria that are represented here. So this was done by each and every one of the facilities that were located within a 100-mile radius of the airport, and really, again, set to kind of define where the fuel was ultimately being sourced, produced, and then how it could come into the airport's infrastructure via the transportation tools and facilities that are represented here. So last slide is really just to represent that this demand forecast was done at a highly detailed level, where we actually looked at each of these facilities and sites. We went to the exercise of identifying what the current infrastructure was and what the required infrastructure would be to serve all of the time horizons that were represented. And even honestly went in and did site plans and schematics for the most viable locations. This was then provided to those operators to make them aware that modest infrastructure investment, even including projected dollar values, would be supported by the folks that produced the study in order to enable SAF production, development, and service to SFO. So from here, actually, we have seen that a variety of the locations that were in our East Bay, so are connected to our airport's pipeline, have actually made announcements that they are either transitioning away from fossil products to alternative fuel, both renewable diesel and sustainable aviation fuel, or are expanding their footprint to include sustainable aviation fuel development and or service to accommodate the Bay Area airports. Just something to note is that actually our pipeline does serve the 3 Bay Area airports, which is something that we are currently partnering on and teaming up, though the benefit to them is that we were able to produce the study, which does give them access and insight into what those development playbooks will look like for the region, not just for SFO. So just in summary, airports have, maybe the last slide is certainly a lot of opportunities. And again, when you're looking at a subnational and a hyper-regional area, understanding feedstock availability, production opportunities and location, the transportation and logistics, and then ultimately the on-the-ground infrastructure can be helpful. For land-constrained airports, looking upstream and using existing transportation and logistics infrastructure is incredibly helpful. It certainly is the most economically viable solution, where the investment is very limited and it has the opportunity to activate the fuel at higher volumes and probably much more quickly. So definitely recommend that for airports that are looking, or subnational governments that are looking for on the ground, on airport facilities. There are great resources and tools to do that. I would say it is reasonably similar to the upstream recommendations that we've had out of SFO. But there are certainly other risks to consider as you're developing that type of fueling infrastructure on site. So sorry, I meant to say last slide, but I just want to thank everyone for their time. Hopefully this was valuable. Always happy to be a resource if folks want to talk SAF infrastructure at any point from an airport's perspective. Thank you so much again.
Thank you very much, Erin. Like, this is a great level of detail. Like, this is what we're looking for on this SAF series, like really to go deep in the topics. Like, and this is all very good material, like that I'm sure will be very, very useful. And thanks for your time, and not only for your time, but also for waking up so early. Like, I know it's it's pretty early there in San Francisco. That's really much appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, so finally, now we get to our last step on the supply chain of SAF, which is the airline. So we'd like to close our speaking list with Kenya Airways. So for that, we'll have Grace Vihenda, which is the Kenya Airways Head of Innovation and Sustainability. So Grace, the floor is yours then. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Confirm you can hear me and see me.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you very much.
All right, wonderful. So my name is Grace Vihenda. In charge of innovation and sustainability at Kenya Airways. The presentation looks stretched. Confirm it's okay on your end.
No, it looks okay for us here. Yeah,
Okay,
it
great.
looks fine.
All
Yes.
right.
Thank you.
All right, I'll just refer to my other screen here. But pretty much our experience is rather different. Our context is different as well. Pretty much here to mean that we don't have any company that manufactures SAF here in the continent, actually in the whole continent. And yet we have feedstocks. We provide a lot of feedstocks that are used in the manufacture of SAF abroad. But that's another different kind of discussion. So pretty much here, I'm saying that in our case, we don't have a facility in the country or the continent that produces SAF. So our experience with the test flight that we did on SAF was quite interesting because we had to play the role of distributor as well as airline. So I'll walk you through what that looked like from our side. However, our strategic goal regarding SAF is to explore the production, development, and marketing of SAF, both in our country and in the African continent, because we are committed to having a sustainable, green and sustainable aviation as part of our contribution. And on the next slide, we decided to do this test flight due to our environmental consciousness and in preparation to comply with the EU laws on SAF uptake. So we pioneered the first long-haul commercial flights out of Africa that was powered by SAF. That was from here in Nairobi up to Amsterdam. So that's the flights that we were targeting. So pretty much we had quite some good learnings, as I'll explain on the next slide, in terms of the many barriers that we encountered, including the supply chain itself. Yeah, just finding a supplier that was willing to supply us here in Nairobi was quite a task. Also, we wanted a supplier because we wanted the flight to go with some percentage of SAF and come back with some percentage of SAF. And also coming back from Amsterdam, that also proved to be quite a tall order. So pretty much from here in Africa, the supply chain for SAF is very fragmented, which makes it very hard to find suppliers. And even when you do find the supply, it comes at a very high cost. The logistics as well of moving the SAF from, we were buying it from Italy, so get it to come here to Nairobi, also getting clearance from customs because it was a new product. So we had to do a lot of explaining of what SAF is, what we're going to do with the fuel, what is it made of, things like that. So pretty much not having SAF infrastructures means that we have to develop what we can as an airline, as well as work with the different stakeholders to develop a framework that works for SAF. And the second one was that we didn't have and still don't have a regulatory framework on SAF in terms of how it's handled, what kind of a product it is, the standards in terms of our Kenya Bureau of Standards and all that. So we pretty much had to work with our regulators to help them understand what we were doing, why we were doing it. So even right now, we are still championing for the regulations for SAF to be in place. However, for the test flight, this was allowed on the basis that it was a test flight. We don't have infrastructure for SAF, meaning that for us to actually get to use the SAF on the flight that we trialed, we actually had to create an opportunity for a supplier who could actually blend. Yeah, we knew the requirements for the kind of supplier, for the kind of we knew the requirements for the facility that would do the blending. So we pretty much just matched that and connected them to the supplier who provided the instructions for how to do the blending. So that we did here locally. But then again, what I'm trying to say is we actually created that capability in country for one of our fuel suppliers to be able to do it. And then this same supplier now had to track it and deliver it onto the aircraft at the airport, because the infrastructure we have at the airport supports the traditional fossil fuel. And the amount of SAF that we're bringing in was too little for it to be taken through the normal infrastructure for the fossil fuel, which means that it's piped within the airport. So because it was too little an amount, we had to literally truck it all the way to the aircraft. And then during this test flights and the learnings that we had from it is we found out that we had a lot of misaligned and unidentified stakeholders. Like, we kept discovering as we go who we are supposed to align with, who we are supposed to involve, who we are supposed to engage. So it was quite a very good experience where we learned a lot. And then also there was a lot of theoretical assumptions previously on what it would cost for us to import SAF and to use SAF on our planes. So at least we were able to get some very good data that we'll still use and that still advises us on the future steps that we'd like to take regarding SAF. And so on the next slide, it pretty much also explains the steps that we took. So one was the SAF that we took, the long-haul commercial flight out of Africa. And then following that, we found that the actual cost of SAF for us was about five times the cost of fossil fuel. So this is also including all the costs that were within the supply chain that we had to create, outside of the manufacturer delivering it to us. So there's a number of things that we had to create along the way. So that made it quite expensive. And then also we identified and worked with the local suppliers who helped us to blend the SAF locally. But as I was explaining, it's a capability we helped them to build. They didn't even know what SAF was. Yeah, so it was quite an interesting journey in terms of us educating people in the supply chain, talking to different stakeholders, helping them to understand, and all of us working together to actually make it work. And then the next one is we had some very good collaborations with various stakeholders in our governments and in the African Union Civil Aviation Authority, our Civil Aviation Authority. So it was quite a good experience in that we got to bring stakeholders because we had a sense of urgency at that time. We had this test flight that had to be done on a specific date. So that sense of urgency was very good because we got to collaborate with different stakeholders to be able to make it happen. And all that helped to catalyze an environment where now we set up a technical working group that is looking at the regulatory framework. This is now from authority, from our government, from different players in the industry. So overall, it's been quite a good learning experience. So ideally, we're supposed to, when we have the infrastructure set up properly, this fuel is supposed to be available at the airport and is for us to buy based on whatever it is that our need is. Yeah, but in our case, we've had to create that whole logistics aspect for it, which is not something we're complaining about. It's just learnings that we've made and supporting our government and stakeholders to be better prepared for SAF. Yeah. And then on the next slide, just has a number of recommendations that we took for different stakeholders. For example, a harmonized approach in terms of as a region, you know, how is it that we want to handle SAF? And here there's a good conversation that needs to happen on having production facility here on the continent. Like I told you before, we have plentiful of SAF biofeedstocks here in the country, including the biofeedstocks from the company that we bought the fuel from. They actually use and export biofeedstocks from our country. Yeah, so we're really pushing for production of SAF here in the country, looking for partnerships that would support that kind of an agenda, because we believe that also for SAF to be truly sustainable, it includes reducing the carbon footprint of having to export it and then to import it back to use it. So those are the conversations that we're driving here in the country. And that goes on to the second point on SAF production facilities in Africa that will definitely help to mitigate the cost. Because if the feedstocks are from here and the feedstocks are plentiful here, then it means if we have production here, then the cost of the SAF will be much lower. Next is also we're talking to our government quite a bit in terms of incentivizing the use of SAF to attract the investment that we require for the setting up of companies that would be willing to produce SAF here in the country and in the continent. And then capacity building and education that as an airline, we have been playing a big part of doing, and also other organizations like ICAO that are also doing a very good job on capacity building on SAF. And then also we've been advocating for SAF infrastructure, especially at our airport and also with our government on different levels. So that includes the blending, the pipeline. We are really also considering how and thinking about how we could potentially use the drop-in fuels, which pretty much eliminates the headache of having to figure out the blending facilities if we don't have them. And then also finally exploring local solutions. Actually, in all this experience, we came to discover that there's actually someone in country who has capability to produce SAF, but because as an airline, we hadn't shown interest or hadn't talked about it before, they just hadn't explored it, yeah. So we've gotten such kind of exciting new partners that we're thinking to work with and develop local solutions and local innovations and research and development, even with universities that we have here in country to see how we can accelerate the production and the use of SAF in country. So how we see on the next slide, our role as an airline, one, it's important that we demonstrate the commitment and which we are. As much as here in Africa, the amount of emissions that we emit is like 4%, which is very little compared to most other countries. We're still committed to actually having a more sustainable aviation and a greener planet. And also we have, we are developing and very much committed to implementing our SAF roadmap that includes how we are going to continue to develop the supply chains and the value chain both in country and across the continent. Most of our destinations are in Africa, so we are very much Africa focused because we see ourselves playing a big role of connecting Africa to the world and the world to Africa. And also we're doing quite a bit of advocacy, like I explained earlier, and industry engagement to keep this conversation alive. And also beginning to look at ways in which we can also take advantage of other emerging emerging fuels. Like, for example, the hydrogen conversation, there's a lot of potential again here in Africa, beginning to engage in those kind of conversations, looking for opportunities in which we can plug in. And finally, customer education and communication. As airlines, we play a very big role in helping customers to understand what we are doing and why we are doing it, and the role that they, the customers, also have to play when it comes to sustainable aviation. So I remember even when we were doing customer education during that flight, the test flight, most customers were like clueless. You know, some of them thought they were using them as guinea pigs for the first time. They thought it's like a new thing. Some were scared, you know. So, but pretty much my point is that we have a big role to play also as airlines in terms of educating our customers and inviting them to join us also in different initiatives and opportunities that we create for them in terms of the use of SAF. So pretty much that's it. I'm at the end of my presentation, which is quite short. I've seen a number of comments popping up, but I think, Bruno, you'll be able to guide us through the questions.
Thank you very much, Grace, and congratulations again on the leadership, like on having this first SAF flight in Africa. Like that's really like inspiring. Like yeah, and also thank you for sharing like all the difficulties and how you overcame them. Like I guess this is very useful experience for our partners here. Yeah, we're running. Yeah, we have just 3 minutes, so I guess it is a good time then to wrap up and say thank you for our speakers for your time and your experiences. This is certainly very enlightening, and we hope that this will be helpful to our partners that are looking at how to deploy SAF like in their specific airports and states. So with that, like just a few closing remarks here from my side, just as a reminder. So here's the list of events. So we will be publishing the video and the presentations in the website very soon. And just like as next steps, like just to remind again, like that we will be sending, as I mentioned on the opening, we'll be sending a survey to all the ACT-SAF partners because we want to hear your feedback on how the year went, like from your side. What are you working with like on SAF in your country or in your organization? What are the difficulties that you're facing, and how we can help like with these ACT-SAF series, or how we can help with the ACT-SAF program in general. So you'll be hearing from us very soon on that, like on the survey, and we really look forward to hearing from you, like on your experiences and your views on the program and on your journey to further SAF use in your specific regions. So thank you very much for that, and I hope everyone have a good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much.